Helena, an elderly widow, decides to organize the attic of her house while dealing with the loneliness after the death of her husband, Miguel. During the cleaning, she finds a box of old letters from Miguel. As she goes through them, Helena discovers a letter addressed to her, dated 50 years ago, but one she never received. It was an autumn morning, and the light wind made the dry leaves dance across the yard of Helena's old house. She was approaching 80 years old, and since Miguel had passed, her routine had become simple, marked by silence and memories. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room was now her only constant companion. But that day, Helena decided to do something she had been putting off for a long time: cleaning the attic. The idea of getting rid of old things, many of which she and Miguel had saved throughout their marriage, always brought her a certain sadness. But now, alone with plenty of time, it felt like the right moment. The attic was a place rarely visited, a mix of chests and dust-covered boxes. Carefully, Helena climbed the narrow steps, each creak reminding her of days gone by. Upon reaching the top, she paused for a moment, inhaling the musty smell of the closed space. She started going through one of the boxes, filled with old photo albums, letters, and objects that held personal significance. Helena found herself smiling as she came across pictures of Miguel as a young man, his eyes always shining with joy. Then, her fingers touched a wooden box that seemed different from the others. Curious, she opened it, finding a stack of old letters that Miguel had kept over the years. Helena recognized these letters. They were exchanged in the early days of their courtship and during the first years of their marriage, before technology made communication easier. As she flipped through the letters, something caught her attention. One of them was neither sealed nor yellowed with age like the others. It was a letter she didn't recognize. There was no sender, but it was unmistakably in Miguel's handwriting, carefully folded as if it had never been sent. Helena hesitated for a moment, her heart beating faster. The letter was addressed to her, but the date in the top right corner made her pause. September 25, 1973. A distant time, when she and Miguel were still young, married for a few years, with 2 small children. Why had he never given her this letter? What had happened back then for him to hold on to it for so long without her knowing? With slightly trembling hands, she opened the letter and began to read. Dear Helena, I've never been good with words, and maybe that's why this letter may never reach you. But there are things that, no matter how hard I try, I can't say to your face. The words escape me when I'm in your presence. And there's a truth I need to share, something I've been carrying in silence. I don't know how to put this in a way that won't hurt you, because that's exactly what I fear most, hurting you. You are the woman I love, but I feel that something in me is incomplete, that I've left important parts of who I am behind. And I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive myself for that. Helena stopped reading, her eyes filled with tears. Miguel's words, so full of emotion and regret, seemed to come from someone she didn't completely know. What had he been trying to tell her? How could he have kept such a letter for so many years without ever mentioning it? She closed the letter and sat down in an old chair nearby, trying to process what she had just read. She felt the weight of decades of living flash before her eyes. Each moment she thought she understood completely, now covered by a shadow of uncertainty. Why didn't you give me this letter, Miguel? She murmured to herself, holding the paper between her fingers as if the answer might come from it. Memories started flowing like an uncontrollable river. Miguel had always been reserved in some ways, but Helena had never thought he carried something so deep and unshared. Was he unhappy? Was the happiness she had always believed they had built together just an illusion? She came down from the attic in silence, holding the letter firmly against her chest. The house, so familiar, suddenly felt different. Helena looked around, as if everything were slightly out of place. There was a growing sense of anguish, a need to understand what Miguel had felt when he wrote those words. Upon reaching the living room, she sat on the sofa and reread the letter, line by line. This time, she noticed every detail. There was more there. Not just regret, but also a latent guilt, something he had carried in silence and that she had never had the opportunity to help him ease. Why hadn't he given it to her? Why had he kept this secret for so many years, letting her believe she knew all his pains and insecurities? The day passed, and Helena couldn't get the letter out of her mind. It was late when she finally got up, placing the letter carefully in her bedside drawer. Sleep came slowly, disturbed by the thoughts that now haunted her. What else didn't she know about the man she had spent her entire life with? The night's silence seemed even deeper, and Helena knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The next morning, Helena woke earlier than usual. The fresh autumn air flowed through the open window, but she didn't feel the usual comfort that came with the start of a new day. The letter from Miguel, now stored in her bedside drawer, felt like it had created an invisible weight on her shoulders. The restlessness from the previous day still lingered. She rose slowly, moving through the house with a new perspective. Every corner, every piece of furniture, seemed to tell a story she had always believed she fully understood, but that now felt incomplete. What else had Miguel kept to himself all these years? As she prepared her breakfast, Helena couldn't shake the memories that came flooding back to her mind. The time when Miguel wrote that letter, in 1973, seemed so far away but still fresh in her memory. She recalled how their life was back then. A young marriage, 2 small children to care for, and the financial struggles they both faced. Miguel had been building his career, working long hours to support the family while she stayed home, taking care of the children and the household. There were moments of tension, of course, but she had never imagined that Miguel had been dealing with something so deep that he would write a letter filled with doubt and regret. Helena had always seen him as a strong man, grounded, someone who rarely let difficulties weigh him down. But as she read his words in the letter, she realized a vulnerability she had never noticed before. Miguel, too, had his fears and regrets, something he had always hidden so well that she never detected it. Sitting at the kitchen table with her cup of coffee in hand, Helena began to wonder if, in some way, she had contributed to the feelings he expressed. Had she been so occupied with the routine, with the responsibilities of the house and children, that she failed to see her husband's struggles? Or had Miguel simply never felt comfortable enough to share his darker thoughts? Looking out the window, Helena remembered how those days in 1973 had felt. Their life was simple, but marked by challenges. She recalled nights when Miguel came home late from work, tired and irritable, but always trying to keep a smile on his face. There were also the times when he seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts, but she had never questioned it. Now, everything seemed different. What if those moments of silence were more than just exhaustion? What if he had been wrestling with internal issues that she, caught up in daily chores, had never noticed? Helena felt a wave of guilt wash over her. There was no way to go back in time and directly ask Miguel what he had been feeling. But the letter, this fragment of the past, was all that remained. An echo of something he never had the courage to say in life. As the hours passed, more questions accumulated. What exactly had he meant by "something in me is incomplete"? What did he believe he had left behind? Was it something related to his career, something he never achieved the way he wanted? Or perhaps it was regret over personal choices, something involving another person. Each new question only deepened the confusion in her mind. Helena stood up from the table and walked to the bedroom where she and Miguel had spent decades together. The room looked the same, but now she felt there were hidden secrets there. She ran her fingers over the frame of a photo of the two of them, taken during a holiday in their early years of marriage. The smiles in the image were genuine, but now she wondered if they also concealed what he had been feeling. Why hadn't he ever given her that letter? Was he afraid of hurting her? Or had he decided, after writing it, that it was better to keep it to himself, maintaining it as a silent confession? As the afternoon wore on, Helena decided she couldn't live without answers. She knew the past was intangible, but she had to try to understand. She felt that by uncovering what Miguel had been going through, she might find peace, both for him and for herself. Helena climbed back up to the attic, the place where this emotional journey had begun. The dust was still there, the old, musty smell, too. But this time, instead of being a painful memory, the attic felt like an archive of her shared past with Miguel. She took out the box of letters again, running her fingers over the envelopes that contained words of love, plans for the future, and even small arguments that seemed so insignificant now. It was as if each of those letters told a story, and together they formed the chronicle of their marriage. Helena felt the urge to reread them all, but decided to start with the ones closest to the date of the unsent letter. Perhaps, in some way, there would be clues about what Miguel had been feeling during that period. Each line she read brought her back to a time when they were young and full of hope, but also filled with uncertainties. As she flipped through the letters, she found nothing that clearly indicated why Miguel had written that particular letter. Everything seemed normal, at least on the surface. He loved her, and that was evident in all his words. But there was a fine line between what he expressed and what he hid, and Helena couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial had slipped past her. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Rosa, her longtime friend with whom she usually shared tea and conversations about life. But today, Helena knew things would be different. She needed to talk about the letter. She needed to share the anguish that had been eating away at her heart, hoping that Rosa might offer some relief or a perspective she hadn't considered. Descending the stairs slowly, Helena opened the door, letting Rosa in. She knew that this conversation would bring new reflections, but she also hoped that, somehow, it would help her understand a little more about Miguel and about herself. Rosa entered with her usual warm smile, but immediately sensed something was different about Helena. The sparkle that usually lit her eyes seemed dimmed, and her friend, normally calm and full of energy, was visibly uneasy. Helena invited her to sit in the living room but said nothing right away. Rosa, sensitive to her friend's shifting mood, waited patiently. "I found something yesterday," Helena began softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "Something that Miguel kept all these years, a letter he never gave me." Rosa, confused, furrowed her brow. "A letter? What kind of letter?" Helena pulled the yellowed envelope from her pocket, the one she now carried everywhere with her. Hesitantly, she handed it to Rosa, who read the contents in silence. Time seemed to pause as Rosa absorbed every line, Miguel's words slowly sinking into her understanding. When she finished, Rosa looked at Helena with a mixture of compassion and surprise. "I never would have imagined," Helena sighed, feeling vulnerable sharing what had been tormenting her since the discovery. "Neither did I. I never imagined Miguel was dealing with these issues. I always thought I knew him deeply, but now, it feels like he was carrying something I never knew about." Rosa placed the letter gently in her lap, reflecting for a moment. "Do you think he was unhappy? Why?" That was the question Helena feared more than any other. She had spent the last 24 hours trying to understand what the letter really meant. "I don't know, Rosa. He never showed any signs of regret. We had our difficulties, like any couple, but unhappy? I can't accept that idea." Rosa paused before responding, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it wasn't about unhappiness in the marriage, Helena. Sometimes, we carry regrets that even our closest family can't understand. Things that belong to the past, unfulfilled dreams, choices we can't undo. It doesn't mean he loved you any less." Helena looked at her friend, absorbing those words. It was exactly the perspective she needed, but one she hadn't been able to formulate on her own. Even so, the uncertainty remained. There was something in the tone of the letter that suggested a weight heavier than mere regrets over missed opportunities. Then why didn't he tell me? Why did he write this letter and then keep it, as if it was a secret I wasn't allowed to know? Rosa shrugged, without having a definitive answer. Maybe he thought you couldn't help him with it. Or maybe he believed sharing these feelings would only cause you more pain. Sometimes silence is a way of protecting the ones we love, even if it's not always the right choice. Helena reflected on that possibility. Miguel had always been a practical and protective man. Perhaps he really did believe that keeping those feelings to himself was best for her and for their marriage. But now, with time having passed and him no longer alive, that silence felt like a burden too heavy to carry alone. Rosa took a sip of tea and looked directly at Helena. "Do you think it's worth trying to find out more about what he was feeling at that time?" "I don't know," Helena answered honestly. "Part of me wants to understand everything, but another part is afraid of what I might find." The silence between them lingered for a moment. Rosa finally spoke, more softly this time. "Helena, we all have layers. I don't think Miguel kept something from you because he didn't love you or trust you. Maybe he just didn't know how to deal with it, or he believed it was too late." Helena nodded, knowing her friend was right. Still, something inside her couldn't just accept that explanation without digging deeper. There was a part of her story with Miguel that now felt incomplete, and the desire to fill that void was growing with each passing hour. "I'm going to try to find out more," Helena said, her voice firm but hesitant. "I need to understand what he was going through at that moment, to finally make peace with it." Rosa placed her hand on Helena's in a gesture of support. "I think you're right. And no matter what you discover, remember that Miguel loved you. That you always knew." Helena smiled, despite the sadness still lingering. Yes, their love was undeniable. But now she needed to understand more than just love. She needed to understand Miguel as the man he was, with his own fears, regrets, and secrets. Before leaving, Rosa looked at her friend and gave one final piece of advice. "I know it's painful, but don't let it consume you. Sometimes, answers aren't what we expect, but we need to move forward anyway." After Rosa left, Helena sat on the sofa, the letter still in her hands. She knew the search for answers would be long, and perhaps she would never get everything she wanted, but at that moment, she was determined. She needed to find out what else had been left unsaid, what else Miguel had been carrying in silence. After her conversation with Rosa, Helena spent the following days in deep introspection. Although her friend's words had brought her some comfort, Miguel's silence seemed even heavier now. What he had left unsaid echoed constantly in her mind, like an unsolvable riddle. The letter remained in her bedside drawer, like a constant reminder that the past is never truly buried. There was something more that Miguel carried, something she could not reach no matter how hard she tried. Each morning, Helena found herself returning to that distant year of 1973. She remembered the nights when Miguel would come home late, quieter than usual, and the days when he seemed troubled but didn't share why. At the time, she thought it was just the exhaustion, the weight of supporting the family, the pressure of making the marriage work while juggling the responsibilities of raising children. But now, with the letter in hand, Helena began to wonder if there had been something more. Miguel had always been a reserved man regarding his emotions. He was loving and affectionate, but rarely did he talk about his deeper feelings. Perhaps he had never felt comfortable enough to expose his vulnerabilities. Helena began rereading old diaries, looking for signs that might indicate what Miguel had been going through at that time. Page after page opened before her like a detailed record of their life together, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The entries spoke of daily tasks, the children, household finances, and small, everyday worries. But Miguel remained a mystery. One afternoon, while revisiting old photos, Helena found an image of him from a trip they had taken to the countryside, shortly after he had written the letter. She remembered that trip well. The two of them spent time away from the worries of home, enjoying the peace of nature. In the photo, Miguel was smiling, his arm around her shoulder. However, upon looking more closely, Helena noticed a shadow in his eyes that she had never seen before. There was something in him back then that she hadn't been able to read, something he never expressed in words, but perhaps had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface of an apparently tranquil life. She could no longer ignore the feeling that Miguel's silence was deeper than she had ever imagined. There were layers to the man she had spent her entire life with that she never truly knew. Now, with this new realization, Helena felt she needed to go beyond memories and diaries. She needed to speak with someone who might have seen Miguel through a different lens. She needed another perspective on the man who had been, at once, so close and so distant. With this newfound determination, Helena decided it was time to talk to her children, Marcos and Clara. Perhaps they could help her better understand what Miguel had been going through during that time. They were small in 1973, but perhaps in some way, they had picked up on something she had missed. Helena invited them for lunch over the weekend, and both agreed to come. Marcos was a practical man, much like his father, and Clara, always emotionally connected to her mother, had already sensed from Helena's tone of voice that something important was at play. On Sunday, as they sat at the table, Clara was the first to notice the worried expression on her mother's face. "Are you okay, Mom? You seem a little distant," she said, while picking at her salad. Helena hesitated for a moment. She had thought a lot about how she would approach the subject, but now, with her children there, it seemed more difficult than she had imagined. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the letter from her drawer and placed it on the table. "I found a letter," she said softly but firmly. "A letter your father wrote to me a long time ago but never gave me." Both children paused, surprised, and looked at the weathered envelope. Marcos furrowed his brow, while Clara seemed intrigued. "What does it say?" Marcos asked, always direct. Helena hesitated before answering. "It's a letter, filled with feelings he never shared with me. Things he kept to himself, regrets, doubts. I don't know exactly what was going on with him at the time, but something was weighing on him, and I never knew." Clara picked up the letter and read it silently, her eyes welling with tears as she absorbed her father's words. When she finished, she passed it to Marcos, who read it more slowly, his expression one of confusion and discomfort. "Why didn't he give it to you?" Clara asked, wiping away a solitary tear that ran down her cheek. "I don't know," Helena replied, the pain evident in her voice. "Maybe he thought it wasn't important. Or maybe he didn't know how to tell me what he was feeling." Marcos placed the letter on the table with a sigh. "Dad was always reserved, Mom. He loved you. I have no doubt about that. But maybe he didn't want to worry you. You two were going through a lot at that time." "I know, but I feel like I missed something important. Something he was trying to tell me, but I never heard." Clara gently took her mother's hand. "Mom, we all have things we don't know how to express, even to the people we love. That doesn't mean he wasn't happy with you. Maybe he was just struggling with something inside himself." Marcos nodded, though his expression remained serious. It's hard, I know. But I don't think this letter changes the fact that you two had a good life together. Dad was a good man, even with his secrets. Helena looked at her children, grateful for their support, but still feeling unsettled. They were right, of course. She and Miguel had lived a long, happy life, with its ups and downs like any other couple. But now that this new piece of the puzzle had surfaced, Helena couldn't simply ignore it. "Thank you, my loves," she said, offering a faint smile. "But I think I need to keep looking for answers. Not to change the past, but to better understand who he was and who I am." The children agreed, offering their support, but Helena knew that this journey would be a solitary one. She would need to continue on her own to discover more about what Miguel had read in silence. After the lunch, Helena began to investigate what else she could find about Miguel during that time. She decided that she needed to look for something that wasn't just in her memories or in their home. Perhaps someone outside her immediate circle knew more about Miguel than she imagined. The first person that came to mind was Laura, an old family friend who had been very close to Miguel at the time. Laura had always been a reserved woman, but very intelligent, and had kept in touch with Miguel for many years. Although there had never been anything more than friendship between them, Helena had always known that Miguel trusted Laura in a special way, sharing things with her that he sometimes didn't even share with his own wife. Helena hadn't spoken to Laura in a long time, but she knew her friend still lived in the city. She decided to call her, vaguely explaining the reason for the contact and asking to meet. To her surprise, Laura readily agreed. On the day of their meeting, Helena was nervous. She didn't know exactly what she expected to discover, but she felt that talking to Laura was an important step in understanding what Miguel had been going through at the time he wrote the letter. When they arrived at the cafe where they had arranged to meet, Laura smiled gently at Helena, but as they sat down, the mood quickly became more serious. Helena decided to be direct. "Laura, I found a letter that Miguel wrote but never gave me. It talks about regrets, about feeling incomplete. I thought you might know more about what he was going through at that time." Laura, visibly surprised, remained silent for a moment. She took a deep breath before responding, her gaze distant, as if trying to gather old memories. "I remember that time, yes," she began, her voice low and careful. "Miguel was struggling with himself. He didn't talk openly, but I could see that something was bothering him." Helena felt a lump in her throat. "Do you know what it was?" Laura hesitated before continuing. He felt that he wasn't living up to the expectations he had placed on himself. He had many dreams when he was younger. You know that, Helena? But over time, responsibilities took the place of those dreams, and I think he didn't know how to deal with that. He loved you and the children, but sometimes I think he wondered if he had lost a part of himself along the way. Helena listened attentively, Laura's words resonating with what she herself had felt when reading the letter. It made sense. Miguel had always been an ambitious man, someone who dreamed big, but life, with all its demands, hadn't always allowed him to pursue the dreams of his youth. "He never spoke to me directly about it," Laura continued, "but I could see it in his eyes. It was as if he was trying to reconcile who he was with who he had become. And I think, deep down, he didn't know if he had made the right choices." Helena felt a pain in her chest, a mix of sadness and empathy for the man she loved so much. It wasn't that Miguel hadn't been happy, but there had been a part of him that remained unfulfilled, a part that he had never been able to fully share with her. "I don't think he regretted his life with you, Helena," Laura said softly, "but he carried this doubt about what could have been. I think we all carry that to some degree." Helena thanked Laura for her honesty. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but she knew that her journey was not yet complete. After the conversation at the cafe, Helena returned home with a mind full of thoughts, but also a sense of relief. Laura had confirmed something Helena had been suspecting since reading the letter. Miguel hadn't been unhappy with her, but with the choices he had made throughout his life. He felt that he had left something behind. Perhaps the dreams of his youth, perhaps the freedom to be who he was before becoming a husband and father. That night, as she reflected on everything she had heard, Helena began to understand that Miguel's silence had not been a secret meant to hurt her, but an attempt to protect both her and himself. By keeping his regrets hidden, he believed he was protecting the relationship he valued so much. But in doing so, he had also isolated himself, preventing Helena from helping him carry that burden. In the days that followed, Helena delved even deeper into her memories of their marriage. She remembered how Miguel had always been devoted to their family, but also how much he loved to talk about the books he wanted to write, the projects he wanted to pursue. However, over time, those dreams had been postponed, replaced by bills to pay and children to raise. Helena wondered if, in some way, She had contributed to Miguel giving up on his dreams. She had always supported him in everything, but she knew she was too practical. When he talked about writing or traveling, she responded with concerns about the children or finances. Had she, unknowingly, discouraged him from pursuing his passions? But at the same time, Helena knew that life was full of commitments and choices. She and Miguel had done what they had to do to build a life together, and that included sacrifices. The very fact that they had stayed together for so many decades was a testament to their love and dedication. But now she saw that those sacrifices had not been without cost. She began to think about how Miguel might have been if he had followed his dreams. Would he have been happier? Or would he always have carried these doubts, no matter what path he had chosen? That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Helena realized that, despite never telling her, Miguel had lived between two versions of himself. The man who loved his family and the man who dreamed of a freer, more creative life. He had always been a mixture of the two, but over time, practical life had taken over. With this new understanding, Helena began to feel a sense of peace growing within her. She knew she could never change the past or relieve Miguel's regrets, but now she could accept who he was in his entirety, a man who loved deeply but who, like everyone, had his own desires and frustrations. As she remembered Miguel smiling on a sunny afternoon, sitting next to her in the garden, Helena realized that that man, with all his dreams and regrets, was the same one who had loved her unconditionally. And that, for her, was enough. As the days passed, Helena began to feel a change within herself. The doubts and anguish the letter had brought were beginning to give way to a sense of acceptance and forgiveness. It wasn't just Miguel who needed to be forgiven for his unspoken regrets. She also needed to forgive herself for not having noticed what he was going through. Helena spent hours reflecting on what she had learned over the past few weeks. She had come to understand that Miguel, like all human beings, was imperfect, full of dreams that never came true but also full of love and dedication. Now, she knew that she didn't need to keep searching for answers in the past. The journey had led her to the realization that Miguel was both the man she knew and the man who had kept secrets, and that both were essential parts of who he was. Sitting in the garden, watching the sunset, Helena felt a wave of peace wash over her. She knew that she could not change what had happened, but she was finally at peace with it. With this new perspective, Helena decided it was time to write her own letter to Miguel. Not a letter of regret, but of gratitude and forgiveness. She wanted to express everything she felt now, the love, the understanding, and the forgiveness she carried in her heart. She took out a piece of paper and a pen, and with steady hands, began to write. Dear Miguel, I found your letter. A letter you never wanted to give me, but that, somehow, made its way to me. When I first read it, my heart broke. I felt a deep pain as I realized that you were carrying a weight you never shared with me. But over time, I began to understand. I understood that you kept those feelings to yourself because you loved me and didn't want to hurt me. You were always like that, protective, thoughtful. But now I know that these secrets weren't about me or about our life together. They were about you. I understand that, like any human being, you had your regrets. We all do. And I know that in your moments of silence, you wondered what could have been. I know that, at times, you looked back and asked yourself if you had made the right choices. But I want you to know, Miguel, that to me, you were always the right man. Even with your unrealized dreams, even with the regrets you never shared with me, you were the husband I always wanted. I accept that you carried parts of yourself that I never fully knew. And that's okay. We are all like that, made of layers, of dreams and secrets. Now, I see that you did the best you could with what you had, and that is enough. I forgive you, Miguel, for never sharing those parts of yourself with me. And I forgive myself for not realizing it sooner. Thank you for all the years we spent together, for the good and the bad moments, for the achievements and the sacrifices. The life we built was real. It was full of love. And that is what I will hold on to. With love, forever. Helena. When she finished writing, Helena felt a profound sense of relief. She placed the letter in an envelope and sealed it, knowing that, although it would never be sent, it was the response she needed to give, to herself and to Miguel. The next day, Helena woke up early and walked to the old tree in the park where she and Miguel used to visit when they were young. That tree had witnessed many important moments in their life together, from their early dates to the last years of their marriage. She took the letter with her, feeling the symbolic weight of the gesture. When she reached the tree, she sat down at its base, feeling the soft breeze pass through the leaves. Everything seemed peaceful. Helena knew that by leaving the letter there, she was saying goodbye to something much larger than Miguel's secrets. She was saying goodbye to the need to understand everything, to the search for answers that would never come. She placed the letter inside a hollow in the tree, a space where Miguel used to leave small notes for her when they were young. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. As she stood up, she felt as if an immense weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Helena looked around, feeling the fresh air and the soft sunlight on her face. For the first time in a long time, she felt light. Leaving the park, she knew that a cycle had come to an end. The past, with all its secrets, regrets, and unanswered questions, was finally at peace. Miguel, with all his layers and complexities, was now part of a memory that Helena could hold without pain. In the days that followed, Helena felt an inner calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew she would never fully understand everything Miguel had felt, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had reached acceptance, not just of who he was, but of who she was. Sitting in her favorite chair, with a cup of tea in her hands, Helena reflected on the life they had lived together. She knew that, like all couples, they had had their ups and downs, but what prevailed was love. The love that had withstood time, challenges, and now even hidden secrets. She knew that the questions about what could have been would always exist, but they no longer needed to haunt her. Life, as she had learned, was full of imperfections. And in the end, the love we share, even with all its flaws, is what really matters. With a serene smile on her face, Helena looked out at the horizon. The past was finally at peace, and the future, however uncertain, now felt lighter. I hope you enjoyed this emotional story. If it touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our future stories. Share it with your friends, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinions and suggestions so we can continue bringing you stories that move and inspire.